against the backdrop of existing inequality, which we know about. I talked about the pay gap earlier, but the average gap is 16.4%. 64% of low-paid workers are women. A massive 40% of ethnic minority women live in poverty. So if you look at, when you talk about the Institute of Financial Studies, it talks about it's a regressive budget, it's going to hit those at the bottom worst. Well, of those at the bottom, the vast majority are women, because we entered this new coalition government with massive structural inequality. And women's average income in retirement is only 50% of the average for men. And one of the things on the child benefit announcement, which hasn't got much coverage yet, is the government's only just linked getting pension credits to the state pension to getting child benefit. There was a big pensions bomb about to happen, but there still is. So one of the results of cutting the child benefit is that women's pensions are going to be affected as well. So this is going to impact on all women because they're not going to accrue pensions. So you've got this whole generation of women, particularly the generation before mine, who were much more likely not to have been in work because they were caring for children, and even the generation that is mine is likely to have accrued less pension. So women already earn less, own less, and have less economic independence. So what does Mr. Osborne's budget do for us there? Headline figures. Of the 18 or 19 billion that this first emergency budget raised, some calculations were done by the House of Commons Library, which you may have read about, which stimulated us to take our judicial review case, which I'll talk about in a minute, because there's some very interesting learning for you locally. So of all the money raised, a massive 72% is going to come from women, compared to 28% from men. I mean, that is not fair by any means of the word. So when this government speaks about benefits, there's a massive inequity. And that's because of the whole approach of the budget, if we go back to the 80-20, was to place a massive emphasis on cutting benefits and welfare, which women disproportionately use. And the tax, taking people out of the tax allowance was a good thing, but a lot more men were in that band anyway, because more men earn more money, so all the kind of tax benefits disproportionately benefit men, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in itself, but that's why. And I've mentioned the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and it's everybody, I think, acknowledges, apart from the government, that it was a regressive budget. And just by default, because women are the poorest, they will get hit hardest, so things not going too well. So, this stimulated us, I don't know if you've heard about it, for the first time in Fawcett's history, we said enough is enough. We've been around for 150 years, we've never in our history taken a litigation or court action. We felt that such was the threat to women's equality, represented by these moves, the impending moves, that we have no option but to take legal action against the government on the budget. Now, those of you, as many equality practitioners here, you'll be familiarised, I'm assuming, with the gender equality duty, which we've all used, I think, over the last few years. There's been training, we've mentioned it, but we did a bit of research and we found out just quite how powerful the case law is, and what the government, as a state body, should have done in considering the budget. So we filed papers in early August with the High Court, asking for a judicial review, which is basically asking the courts to review the decision of government to check whether it was lawful or not. That's what it does. On the basis that we do not believe the government undertook its legal obligation to do a gender impact assessment of the budget. Anybody who looks at even that top line figure, 72%, 28%, you would kind of think, well, if they did, they either ignored it, well, they clearly did ignore it, or, but we don't think they did. And obviously, we do speak to them all the time. We asked them, we wrote to them, we asked them nicely, could you tell us what you were doing, didn't get anything. So what we're seeking is a quashing order, which would declare the entire emergency budget unlawful. Now, whether that's likely to happen, I don't know. But more importantly, specifically, we want the government to undertake and publish a gender impact assessment of the budget. Why? Because it's not transparent. Because if they're going to make these decisions, and it's okay they have a policy that is built on the backs of women, then say so. Let's have a debate. Take action where necessary and take their legal obligations seriously. And this is really important for you working in a regional and local area. This is a powerful piece of law. It was brought in 4 or 5 years ago. It shifts the responsibility onto public bodies to think in advance how will their decisions impact on gender inequality. It is not a weak piece of legislation. It is deadly serious. And local authorities and any other public body must take note of it. Now, the really important thing to remember is we're not trying to use this piece of law to change the budget. You can't do that. Parliament sets budgets. And we would do this whichever government had come in, had they done a budget like this. For us, it's completely non-party political. But there is a process thing here. This is about the status of women and the status of this law in our governance and in our policy making. I am personally sick to death of policymakers just ignoring the fact that the law of this land is that you must consider women's and other groups' equality and human rights in your decisions, and you cannot just ignore it in the rush to get a budget through, and the sheer arrogance. So, yeah, that's why we did it. Now, I just want to explain about the case law because it's really relevant for you in a local area. What the case law says is what our public body is required to do. So think about this when the cuts come down the line and you're working regionally. They have a legal responsibility to collect data about men and women and how policies may impact differently. They have to do an analysis of that data. They have a legal responsibility to assess policy proposals and changes, whether it's cuts to the local women's aid or your overall local strategic partnership plan, and to produce action plans. And tell you what else the case law says. This will make you smile. It has to be a robust process. They have to do it properly. It has to be transparent, so it has to be publicised. People need to know about it. They need to consult with the groups involved, and it has to be done critically before decisions are made and before policies are implemented. Now, this is what the courts have said. This is the law of the land. These are things that you can raise directly with public bodies here. You can get, if you phone this up, you can get our press briefing, which has all this information. We're doing a briefing as well. But it's only on the books till next year, so use it. Right. I was asked to talk about that. Next steps are waiting to hear if we've got permission. This is a legal thing. We're waiting for an oral hearing. Interestingly, I think we've already won in some ways. The government admitted in the press they didn't do it. And they said they didn't do it because they didn't have the data. Now remember, what did I say earlier? It's their legal responsibility to collect the data in the first place. They've also said that, you know, so it can't be done. Clearly, it was done by the House of Commons Library in 3 days. It was done by Fawcett overnight. Obviously not deep and in depth. But it's not a reason for not doing it. So they've admitted they haven't done it, which I think is a good start. And I think there's been a lot of press interest, and I think it's really galvanised other people as part of the debate. So we're hoping to see, well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens next. But they've also said they're going to do it for the comprehensive spending review. So we've obviously got parliamentary question. Caroline Lucas is asking for us this week, I think. Did they do a gender impact assessment of child benefit cuts? I mean, I'd be really interested to see that transparent, robust process. It was so transparent that half the cabinet didn't know, including the Minister for Equalities, Theresa May. Anyway, so I'll be quick on this. Concerns so far are the comprehensive spending review coming up. We know we've got the public sector job losses coming up. The government's equality machinery, it doesn't get much press. It's actually really, really important. I know you've got somebody here from the Women's National Commission, which is on a list potentially to be abolished. The Equality and Human Rights Commission probably cut heavily. But don't underestimate the significance of this move against WNC. It doesn't cost anything. Symbolically, after the nonsense on rape anonymity, the heat-seeking missile, the woman-seeking missile we've been calling it, that was the emergency budget, it is shameful.